Good morning. My name is Ramona Rashan with Trauma Informed Los Angeles. I have been in public service for over 20 years. I'm a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in working in the areas of trauma, social justice, child welfare, and equity. Today, we're going to talk about vicarious trauma and secondary trauma and how we can incorporate ways in which we can address these issues within our practice. So an overview of the training, again, we're going to talk about secondary trauma. We're going to talk about the impact it has on our health and well-being, and then a little bit about wellness and self-care. Objectives for this training is to provide an understanding of vicarious and secondary trauma, to increase the ability to cope with signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma, and increase your ability to recognize the signs of vicarious and secondary trauma, and then to provide some tools for wellness and enhance your professional longevity. So we'll start with the quote. Compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves by Pema Chodron. It's very important for us to remember that we need to be able to operate from a full cup, because we operate from an empty cup. You're not being able to give your full self to be able to provide the best services to your clients. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of trauma-informed practice. But simply put, the hallmarks of trauma-informed practice are when the service provider puts the realities of the client's trauma experiences at the center, at the forefront when you're engaging clients, and adjust the practice approach informed by the individual client's trauma experience. And trauma-informed care highlights the importance of the 4 R's. So this is recognize, so recognizing that, the behaviors that you see is based on the trauma, responding in a trauma-informed way, and engaging clients. You want to respond and empower them, and resist re-traumatization. The 6 main principles of trauma-informed care is the first one is safety. So safety is so important. You want to provide these safe spaces for clients, a container. And again, we're talking about the spaces, the way you engage them, the language, build trustworthiness and transparency in regards to like making sure they're prepared when you're engaging them. Peer support. So provide them with other resources and other people who maybe have experienced the things that they're going through within the practice that you're doing. And then collaboration and mutuality. And that's really talking about leveling off the power differences to power with rather than power over. This could be in decision making. You want to model that healing happens in relationships. So your relationship with the client starts with your first interaction with them. And then you really want to empower them and be strength-based. And the fact that they came in even to your practice to engage with you is a strength, right? So you want to build on those, and you want to validate their voice and choice in the process and collaborate with them to build the best legal options for them as we move forward with engaging them. And you want to be considerate of cultural and historical issues. So trauma-informed practice also encompasses that the practitioner employs these modes of self-care to counterbalance the effects that the trauma experience may have on you as a practitioner working with trauma survivors. So as we know, this is a brief definition of trauma. Again, I'm not going to go through all the levels, but individual trauma results from an event or multiple events or circumstances that are experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. And they can have lasting effects on the individual's functioning, whether they're mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. But as we know, trauma has layers. And as I said before, complex trauma is when people experience multiple traumas. Those could be adverse childhood experiences, community traumas, environmental issues. And we know that trauma can also be direct or indirect. So direct trauma is when it happens to the actual individual, and indirect can be when it's someone else or they're witnessing a trauma, like a crime or victimization, or again, if they're exposed to people who have been traumatized, and that can also be an issue as well. And then secondary trauma, again, is coming to close contact with individuals who've experienced direct trauma. And then vicarious trauma, we're going to talk both about those today, is exposure to reports, descriptions, photos of horrific events or crimes that have been against a victim or survivor. So just a little bit more about secondary trauma. We're going to talk a lot about that today. So again, it's when you come into frequent or close contact with people who've experienced direct trauma. And when you're witnessing these behaviors or taking part in interactions that result of traumatization, they can lead to secondary trauma. And so we talked about this before, again, in our previous training, but you can develop compassion stress produced by wanting to help survivors, and compassion fatigue in this state of debilitating exhaustion. It becomes dysfunctional because it's affecting you physically, emotionally, and it really results from a long-term exposure to compassion stress. So that stress of wanting to provide help, but being not necessarily always successful. And so self-care practices can help professionals reduce these symptoms of vicarious trauma. So we're going to go a little bit more deeper into what secondary trauma looks like. So secondary trauma. What we notice about secondary trauma is that a lot of professions, particularly the legal profession, it's not necessarily something that's always been trained in the legal profession. So we have a lot of attorneys who are not adequately trained in the spectrum of negative impact when you're working with traumatized populations. And sometimes, that you bring this to the surface and it can create professional burnout. So this describes a specific phenomenon. So let me be clear that secondary trauma is not burnout. So a lot of people will kind of mix those up a little bit, but that's not necessarily true, right? So this is a phenomenon when a professional's personal experiences combined with negative cumulative effects of providing services to clients over time, they become in like emotional exhaustion. You depersonalize and reduce the sense of personalized accomplishment because you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. It's just too much. Signs of burnout can include headaches. You're feeling negative, overcritical, exhausted, irritable, have issues sleeping, anxious, feeling inadequate, hopeless, neglecting your own self-care, feeling numb or apathetic about life. But fortunately, taking a break, right? Going on vacation, taking a break from work can help with remedying secondary trauma, with burnout. But with secondary trauma, this results again from engaging in these empathic relationships with individuals suffering from traumatic experiences and really bearing witness to the intense or horrific experiences that are of the person's trauma. And then vicarious trauma refers to harmful changes that occur within ourselves, as professionals in the world as a result of exposure to the graphic traumatic experiences of the client. So those will be more like, again, when you're looking at reports or reading the details of some of the cases that you have and just really kind of taking those in your body. So your body, keeps track of the trauma that we're exposed to, and that can be very, very harmful. And again, we touched a little bit upon compassion fatigue, but it's best described as a state which the advocate is engaged in helping in the helping profession and experiencing both burnout and secondary trauma. And then again, over time with compassion stress of not being able to have success with every single trauma survivor that we work with. So professionals who experience vicarious trauma may experience painful images and emotions associated with their clients' traumatic memories. So that may look like when you're reading a case or seeing something, you may have kind of like flashbacks of remembering or making that experience like as if you're living it. So kind of like this empathetic type of flashbacks to the client. As a result, this may shift your mental models, and they could shift mental models within safety, trust, your esteem, intimacy, control. And each of these are representing a physiological need, a psychological need that you have. And again, these mental models are in relation to these harmful effects of vicarious trauma that occur, and they cause disruptions in the mindset. So you're constantly reading, and you start to distrust things that may be associated with some of the cases that you're looking at. So vicarious trauma has been described as common long-term responses to working with these traumatized populations, and is part really of a continuum of helper reactions, and again, ranging from vicarious trauma to vicarious growth. So you can learn and grow and become more resilient as you're exposed to vicarious traumatization and secondary trauma. So some of the factors that increase vulnerability could be over-identification with the victim. So sometimes we have countertransference, or we see ourselves in the clients that we're serving. We can have increased stress in our own personal lives. When you're bearing witness to the cruelty inflicted upon innocent victims, particularly women, children, people who have less power, marginalized communities, we feel more inclined to be able to help. And when we're not successful, we start to develop these types of secondary and vicarious trauma. So it's not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's not a reflection of you being toxic or not sufficient to be able to help the client, but it is definitely an occupational hazard. And it can be cumulative. It can build up over time and across clients. So not just with one client, but you're having a bunch of cases that have, similar circumstances that can build up to cause these kinds of things. But it can be addressed. So when we're looking at the spectrum of vicarious trauma, you have on one side the negative effects being vicarious traumatization, the secondary traumatic stress, and of course we talked about compassion fatigue, but you can manage it effectively, and that will put you at kind of like that neutral state. So if you're building resilience and you're able to manage it, then it's not going to have as much of an effect on you. And then the positive effects, again, that you're building up resilience, you're kind of transforming this vicarious exposure, vicarious trauma exposure, to something that's going to be able to help you with future clients. And then you kind of have this compassion satisfaction, because now I know I've been compassionate with my clients, I've done my best, and I'm starting to see that, I'm able to kind of navigate this secondary trauma into kind of a post-traumatic growth. So again, just some things to look out for. When you're looking at vicarious trauma, you may be less likely to make decisions in your own best interest. You may make professional errors, and your boundaries with the client. Maybe your judgment could be altered as a result of exposure to a vicarious or secondary trauma. And sometimes we're a little less self-reflective and unable to sort out our feelings and responses from those of the client. And we can fail to set limits. We can overextend ourselves. This can lead really to inevitable failure with our cases, and we're less able to notice it or analyze it within our own feelings as we guide ourselves through this practice. So again, when you're trying to identify secondary trauma, it could be even the denial of a client's trauma. So we talked about before, when I was just talking about trauma in general, about other people. So preparing a client for other people not to be able to believe their trauma. But sometimes we have clients who come in and we're not, believing their trauma. We need to kind of take a step back at that moment and say, is it us that is not believing them because of our overexposure to this type of event? Or is it actually that the client may not be, truthful, or maybe remember that trauma also causes gaps in memory, or maybe the way they're presenting the details of a case may be also impacting our perception of that. Again, in the workplace, that could be avoidance, hypervigilance, defensiveness. If we're talking about, on a personal level, you can have a disconnection from loved ones. You can have those intrusive thoughts and images that I spoke about, physical symptoms just in regards to headaches, feeling insecure, sensitivity to violence. So you may hear something on the news or see something, and then you feel a little bit more affected, by the details of the things, that you see. So you have a disrupted frame of reference. This really can shift your worldview when you're constantly exposed to secondary trauma, and it can really diminish your own capacities, and it impair your sensory experiences in regards to when you see or hear, smell certain things. You'll start to realize that those things can really cause issues with you. There is a tool, and I'll provide the link to this tool as well, that you can kind of gauge yourself or assess yourself. It's called the Professional Quality of Life Measure, and I'll provide the link to that for you guys to be able to assess yourself just in regards to how secondary trauma may be impacting you in your work. So let's take a moment and think, how might we? So how might we think about how secondary and vicarious trauma is impacting us in regards to our social determinants? Is it having an impact on equity, just in regards to any kind of discriminatory things and how we are, viewing maybe some of those things? Is it having an effect on our health? Do we have higher blood pressure? Do we have, diminished health practices? Are we not eating? Do we not have good eating habits? And is it impacting our ability to be resilient in dealing with that? Or any other of our identities, whether it be gender, race, socioeconomic status, impacted by our exposure to these secondary and vicarious trauma experiences. So just take a moment and think about those ways in which you could be impacted by secondary trauma in times that you have, and then just jot those down and give it some thought. Okay. So remember, trauma creates change that you don't choose, but healing is about creating change that you do choose. So the impact of secondary and vicarious trauma is not permanent. So as practitioners, you can employ methods of self-care to prevent vicarious trauma. And one of the most important preventative measures is for you to diversify and manage your caseload so that as a legal practitioner, you can work with trauma survivors as well as clients who have not experienced severe trauma. So we need to balance our cases so that we're not dealing with all negative cases. As a child welfare provider, I often deal with cases, particularly I used to read a lot of cases with child fatalities. And I didn't do that every day because I had to balance it with the hope that there are children, obviously, that are not being, killed within the care of their parents. So again, you have to balance, the things that you're exposing yourself to so you don't become overwhelmed with too many cases that are that have severe trauma associated with them. It's also important to create a workplace culture that acknowledges the potential for vicarious trauma. So this can include with creating spaces for supervision, with peer support, and encouraging open communication about the effect of the work. One of the things that is most helpful is to create kind of like a circle of support within your office so you can kind of engage. Of course, you want to maintain confidentiality. I cannot let that go, but definitely be able to talk to other people about certain things that you may be feeling, experiencing, or dealing with a particular client to minimize the effects of secondary and vicarious trauma. So as you acquire new cases, think specifically about whether and how that you may be affected by the client's trauma histories and whether they're experiencing themselves, vicarious or secondary trauma. So if you get a new case and you feel like, oh, this may be something that may trigger me, then to take a step back and think, how am I going to mitigate this for myself so that I can provide the best services to my client? So Mother Teresa said, to keep the lamp burning, we have to keep putting oil in it. So again, in order for us to be able to serve our clients at its best, you cannot serve from an empty cup. You have to be able to constantly be refilling your cup so you can provide the best service to your client. So self-care in the sense of setting appropriate boundaries between, yourself and the client is recognized to be a protective factor against vicarious and secondary trauma. So Sandra Bloom, who was the creator of the sanctuary model, which is one of the trauma-informed care practices, she divides self-care into several components. She looks at, the physical, the psychological, social, moral, professional, and your work setting and societal setting as well. And so you need to address your exposure to secondary trauma on all of these levels if you're going to be successful with managing it. So the demands of practicing law can accumulate and threaten your well-being. I mean, that's just, very common knowledge in regards to attorneys. But when signs of distress are ignored, the quality of work and personal lives, it can decline. So a study was conducted with practicing lawyers, and it found that between 21 and 36% qualified to be problem drinkers, 28% experienced some level of depressive symptoms, 18% experienced elevated anxiety. Other impacts can include job satisfaction. You can have issues with sleep, work addiction, home life balance issues, and loneliness because you're constantly working and wanting to provide particularly better outcomes for clients who are survivors of trauma. And so critical impacts can even include suicide. But I'll pause and say that, again, if we are addressing or even aware that secondary trauma and vicarious trauma can have these impacts, then we won't necessarily have these negative outcomes for ourselves, and they won't be impacting the work we're doing with our clients. So as an attorney, well-being should be a continuous process, that you're working across those multiple dimensions that I mentioned a minute ago. And the way that you function in one dimension can enhance or impede the way you function in one of the others. So think about that. And we're going to go a little deeper into what the American Bar Association says about that. But I'll say before I move on, a good strategy is to develop a personal self-care plan that incorporates all those different components. So be intentional about addressing the different components of your self-care plan, and then check in with yourself. Have an accountability buddy. So maybe someone that works at your practice or a friend that's going to hold you accountable for addressing your self-care. So it's important to model self-care for your staff and colleagues so it's valued by your team. And it should not be a solo endeavor, because just like with anything else, whether people are thinking about, think about the times where a lot of people go on diets, right? And if they're doing it by themselves and they're around people who aren't doing it, it's like, oh, let's go out and let's go eat this. And then we find it very difficult to be able to manage it. But if everyone is thinking like, hey, did you take a walk today? Hey, did you meditate today? Like, oh yeah, I did. Did you? So when you're doing those kind of things, you're doing it in a collective, and you have support because other people, it normalizes self-care within the profession. So again, the American Bar Association developed a well-being guide, and I also provided that as a resource for you guys. And it was really due to the pervasive and continual need to address well-being in this profession. So like with Sandra Bloom, it covers these different areas, dimensions of your life. So looking at the emotional dimension, intellectual, occupational, physical, spiritual, and social. So again, you want to look at the emotions, that you're experiencing when you're exposed to secondary and vicarious trauma, and how is it changing the way you think? Is it changing your mental models? Is it changing your worldview? And are you being more hyper aroused by different things that you may see on the news and movies? Just exposure to anything, right? Is it having any impact on your occupation or professional growth? So if you feel that you're making mistakes or having boundary issues with clients, that could be an issue as well. Just in regards to physical, we talked about that. It can have a lot to do with your health, and wellness. And then again, not your spiritual well-being. So it's not that anyone can believe in, whatever, any in particular spiritual belief, but just having a connection to something else to help you, to guide you through the process, is also helpful. And then again, is it having any impact on your social life? Is it having an impact on your personal life, but also your ability to be able to develop connections and sense of belonging, as they say, with a group of people who are sharing similar experiences. So the American Bar Association talks about 3 things. So it says 3 reasons to care about well-being. It's the right thing to do, right? And it also impacts competence. So we talked about Rule 1.1 in regards to professional competence and addressing and understanding trauma for your clients, but also to understand it and address it for yourself as well. And it's good for business, because if you're taking care of yourself, you're able to provide better care and better practice for your clients, which will achieve better outcomes, right? So it talks about 13 healthy workplace factors: a culture of trust, mental health support, effective leadership, civility and respect, good person job fit. Is this the kind of law you want to practice? Is this a good fit for you? Again, your growth and development, recognition and reward. Sometimes people experience job dissatisfaction because they're working so hard at a particular thing and they're not feeling that they're recognized. But just communicating that, to a supervisor, not to colleagues where you're just venting, but really saying, I really felt I did a good job on this. And we're not always going to get the pat on the back or the recognition that we deserve, particularly in work and working with trauma survivors. But sometimes we have to celebrate the small wins for ourselves. So involvement and influence, workload management, we talked about that earlier, how that could be an issue. Employee engagement, so that the practice that you're at, that they're engaging and getting input. So a lot of the things that we talked about in regards to trauma-informed care, these are embodied within these practices that the American Bar Association indicate should have for healthy workplace environments. And again, you know, psychological and physical safety and work-life balance. So we have to ensure that we're creating this work-life balance. And they go over these 6 dimensions of lawyer well-being. And again, looking at occupational, emotional, physical, intellectual, spiritual, and social, which we went over on the previous slide. And then it also has 8 steps for an action plan to launch yourself for well-being. So remember I said you need to create an action plan and then hold yourself accountable. So you want to enlist leaders within your practice. You know, you want to start this well-being committee, you know, define what that means. What does well-being look like for practitioners? You know, do a needs assessment, which I'll provide that to you as well, and identify what is priority for yourself and for your agency as you're looking at creating a well-being program. And then, you know, make and execute a plan. And again, make sure it's something that you can hold yourself accountable to and make sure it's realistic. Create kind of like what we call SMART goals, right? And then create a well-being policy and then measure and evaluate and improve as you move on. So this toolkit is a great tool that you can incorporate into your daily and weekly practice. It includes worksheets that will help to guide you. You can do them daily, you can do them weekly, you can do them in a group. You know, so there's many things that you can do. It includes a lot of articles that will be able to help you on this journey. They have several book recommendations, a couple of them. There's one by Jenna Cho and Karen Gifford called The Anxious Lawyer, an 8-week guide to happier, saner law practice using meditation. There's another one I looked at called Dealing with the Stresses of the Legal Profession, and then the 6-minute solution and mindfulness primer for lawyers. So again, you can look at the guide. It's very detailed, and I think it'll be very helpful on your journey for self-care and experiencing vicarious trauma. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what are some of these things. How do I make a plan, Ramona, right? So now we'll get into some of the wellness practices that you can start today to address stress and secondary trauma. So these practices, they don't have to take a lot of time, but you can do something as little as a minute to prevent long-term effects of exposure to trauma. So think about it. You can do yoga. You can do walks. You want to keep it moving. You know, you want to do meditation. Sometimes if you're sitting at your desk, if you just stand up for a minute and just walk around, just to like shake your hands and just move, that really helps you to be consciously present. You also want to change your environment. Again, walk outside for a minute. Sometimes just looking at the trees, the traffic, the clouds, wherever you are, will help you. So you need to take these brain breaks, I call them, right? Just kind of relax your mind. And sometimes, again, when you're up against a wall and it's something that's complex or conflict, or particularly if you're looking at details of a case and you feel that you're becoming overwhelmed, you need to take a step back and then wait and then go back to it. And trust me, you will do a better job when you've given your brain a break from the exposure to the trauma that you're looking at or reading. So why practice mindfulness, right? So 9 out of 10 find practicing mindfulness will help to decrease anxiety. And sometimes people think, well, I don't have any anxiety. I'm fine. I've been doing this for a while. I know what I'm doing. But really, we have anxiety because, again, our body's keeping score, right? Our body's keeping score of the stress that we're exposed to. So 8 out of 10 people, it says that they claim practicing mindfulness contributes to their overall well-being. So mindfulness is defined as having this moment-to-moment awareness without judgment. So a lot of times they'll tell you, you know, just let your mind drift. And sometimes when you're meditating, they'll say, you may have a thought, because we're always thinking, right? Particularly as service providers in the trauma profession. And let the thoughts come. And they'll tell you, okay, I recognize you thought. I recognize that you're telling me, don't forget you have this appointment with this client. Don't forget you have to go and file this motion. That's fine. Acknowledge it. Don't judge it, and then just get back to trying to let your mind go and, you know, where it needs to go. You know, so it's about intention, attention, and attitude. So you always want to be very gracious and give grace to yourself, you know, in this practice. So mindfulness in the workplace means being present and attentive to your task at hand, but it also means implementing skills to effectively cope with both short and long-term stress. So again, some of the effects of mindfulness, it will decrease stress, it can improve your attention span, and it definitely will decrease anxiety. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other self-care tips that I have for you today. So we have a visualization technique. So sometimes you can what I do is I have a picture of like my happy place. So for me, my happy place is Maui. I love to go there. The minute you get off the plane, if you guys have never been, you really should go. You just exhale because everything there is so calm and peaceful. It's just a very beautiful vibe. And that may not be right for some people. They may think, oh my gosh, like I have friends who say, oh, I don't want to go to Maui. I like to go to Oahu because I like all the hustle and bustle. And that may be self-care for them. So you have to say what's self-care for you and what's some place that you would like to visualize yourself, even again for a minute, that you'd like to be. So you can put that picture again of your happy place on the wall. You can also use different techniques. So there's a stop technique where you take a few breaths, observe, and then proceed. So you stop, again, take a few breaths, observe, and proceed. So again, that can happen in a minute, just a few breaths. So when a project brings on feelings of being stressed and overwhelmed, you can take a short break, again, 1 to 5 minutes, and focus on one task at a time. And practice mindful listening during your meeting. So if you notice, a lot of times people disassociate, but again, remember that that is a defense mechanism. That is your brain telling you, hey, you need a break. So when you're in maybe, case rounds and you're hearing a bunch of stuff and you find yourself drifting, notice that and figure out why your brain decided it needed to take a break at that time. Another thing is sometimes when we're in meetings and we need to take a break, you can literally draw on your hand the word calm. It sends a message to your brain to calm down. So just doing something like that, that's also something that you can use with clients as a grounding technique. If you see somebody's really upset, or even with younger clients, with kids, you can have them write that word calm in their hand. So if you have a moment, try it right now, and hopefully it works for you as well. So I talked about creating that, post of a happy picture, or even having it in your background for your computer so that when you load it up and get ready to work on something, then you can look at that picture and it'll help you. Again, water. I cannot talk about water enough. Just replacing your caffeine with infused water. You can put it in the refrigerator overnight. You can infuse it with mint, watermelon, strawberries, cucumber, all types of things. If you go on the internet, there's all kinds of recipes for infused water, and it really helps not only to hydrate you, but to really be able to help you to be healthier, and it helps with stress as well. And so another thing is prioritizing in threes. So when we're creating case plans for clients in the field of social work, we don't want to give them more than 3 things to think about, right? So to do. And as attorneys, you also want to think about in threes. So if you're doing something, you're going to have to do maybe 15 things in a day, perhaps. But if you can think, what are the 3 first things I have to do? And you don't have to worry about the other 12 things. Think about those first 3 things and then do those. And then, so when you're overwhelmed, I only have to think about these 3 things. And then what are the next 3 things? And then the next 3 things. Eventually your list will be gone. But if you're only focusing yourself on 3 things in your mind, it's not as overwhelming. The other thing is to celebrate successes. So small victories are still victories. So if you finish those first 3 things, that's great. Give yourself that grace and that success, and celebrate that for yourself, because sometimes you're not going to get necessarily the accolades from somebody else. So you need to celebrate that. And just that act of giving yourself a kudos, like, wow, you can have a little jar where you put a little note or something in there, like, look, I did that today, a gratitude jar, on your desk. So for every time you celebrated a success, make yourself a little note about what that success was. And at the end of the year, you have all these successes that you've accomplished, and just looking at it build up will help you with your stress and anxiety. Now, of course, there are several smartphone applications for meditation, such as Calm, Headspace, Happier, DigiPill, Spirit Junkie, Beautify. There's all those kinds of apps that you can use. They have even YouTube, that you can go on and have 1-minute meditations, 5-minute meditations. There's meditations that are themed. So if you like a particular type of music, I have a Peloton, so I use a lot of, the 5-minute meditations that I like. to do. So it just really depends on what works for you. So remember, you are the person as the center of your plan. Just like we center trauma-informed care on the client, you're centering trauma-informed care on yourself. So, and then also the other thing is reserve time for your activity. So just like you jot in appointments with the client, you can literally schedule in your planner on your phone. I'm reserving 5 minutes for me to take a break. You can take these 5 minutes or even 2 minutes in between clients. I'm going to intentionally focus on meditating or mindfulness or walking outside. So reserving those time for activities that are personally meaningful and for you to connect with nature, with spirituality, with creative expression. Some of the things that I do is, with drawing, maybe even volunteer work. I do a lot of volunteer work, like I volunteer with Trauma Informed LA. Hobbies, whatever other interests you have or endeavors that are going to help you on, fulfill your personal needs and growth. And also encouraging attendance for professional meetings outside of the office. So if you're thinking about other people, again, we talked about peer support when it comes to trauma-informed care, create your own peer support, network so that people who are having similar experiences to you, again, will be helpful to you. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but you can get like those doodling journals where they have kind of like the intricate, it kind of looks like henna, but they're just different types of art coloring books, adult coloring books. You can get them from Barnes and Noble, from Walmart, Target. I used to give out little ones when I did these trainings in person, and people would draw, because just that doodling and drawing when you're listening to details of your client's stuff will help you to kind of release that dopamine. It activates dopamine and serotonin in your brain and helps you free up space to think. So that is helpful. And then when you're doing yoga, your psoas muscle in your yoga poses is somewhere around your pelvic area. And when you're lying down and activating that, it helps to release also dopamine and serotonin to your brain and helps you to relax as well. So again, create a self-care plan for yourself and create environments that are physically and psychologically safe without fear or judgment. You want to maximize consistency and predictability. And another thing that you can do is called the butterfly tap. So if you see my fingers like this, and this is for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And this is something also you can use as a grounding technique with your clients. So you interlock your two thumbs and then your hand kind of like a butterfly, and then you tap yourself. You can tap yourself to the beat of your own heart, or just tapping yourself. Again, you could just do this for a minute, like, oh, wow, I don't want to read this case right now. So I'm just going to interlock my thumbs. I'm going to tap myself. I'm going to take a deep breath, and then I'm going to get back to what I need to do. So that is also very helpful as well. So you can also create what I call a chill out kit. I love these things. So you can have this little bag and you can create a chill out kit. You can put a stress ball in there, a fidget spinner. You can also use these with your clients, right? A gratitude journal. So write one thing that you're, grateful about. It can be affirmations. So you can have a list of affirmations. You can put them on Post-it notes. You can put them in the mirror in your bathroom when you wake up in the morning, you're getting ready. You can look at that affirmation for the day, like, you're worthy, you are enough. Whatever it is that's going to help you, you're going to get through today. You're going to be successful in this case, whatever it is. You can have noise canceling headphones. I used to have those when I was in the office. So you can put them on and listen to some music, whatever type of music you like. You can listen to either meditation music, again, jazz, rock, rap, whatever helps you to relax. I talked before about having coloring sheets, pads or pencils. So right now, I want you to think about what would you put in your chill out kit? So make a list of things that you feel are de-stressful to you or would be distressful to your clients. Because when your clients are de-stressed, you're going to be distressed as well. And then make sure, again, that chill out kit is accessible to you. So maybe you can even make a virtual chill out kit and create a little folder on your phone or mobile device that has things that will help you to chill out pretty quickly. Okay. So the perfect way to reset and refocus is to simply take a pause. So remember what I said about take a moment to be able to stop, think about what you're, stressed out about, and then take a few breaths, and then you can move forward. with whatever it is you were going to do. So we're going to talk about a few breathing techniques that you can try as well. So when you're under stress, your muscles tense up and your breathing becomes shallow and rapid. So one of the simplest and best ways to stop and de-stress is to breathe deeply and slowly. And I know it sounds simple, but and it really is simple. So deep methodological breathing can help stimulate the vagus nerve, which is known to trigger calming responses in the body. So if you have time, look that up. I'm not going to go into it in depth because this is really about self-care, but it's very helpful. So when things start to get overwhelming, it says stressful, exhausting, rest and take deep breaths. So this can be done in any position. The best results they say are gained though when lying down, but you can also do it while sitting upright. So you can tightly close your eyes and focus on the breath. And so you don't get distracted by environmental factors or noises, and then you begin to follow the flow of your breath. Sometimes if you just stop and pay attention to what your natural breathing pattern is, if you have a smartwatch, you can kind of see like, what is my heart rate? And then how do I get it to come down when I'm stressed out? You can feel the air coming in and out of your nose. So sometimes if you want to cool down, you can curl your tongue and you can breathe in and then breathe out through your nose. And that's like a cooling breath. So you can cool yourself down if you're feeling hot. And you can breathe in one nostril and then breathe out the other is another technique that you can do. You can feel the air coming through the nostrils and you can kind of perceive the coolness as the air travels through your sinuses and you allow your rib cage to rise and the breath to enter your chest. And as the breath fills the lungs, the stomach starts to relax and the air goes and expands the diaphragm. And then you follow the breath back out to the body. A lot of the meditations I do will say, we're going to take the breath from the back of our spine, and then you're going to breathe all the way up to the top of our heads, and then we're going to return the breath back down to our spine. And I know that seems crazy because you're like, well, my breath is going from my belly out to my mouth. But when you start to really visualize these things, you really feel like the breath is actually going through your spine and through your body, and it's helping you to calm down. Another technique is called 4-7-8 breathing. It's also known as a relaxing breath, and it involves breathing in for 4 seconds, and then you hold the breath for 7 seconds, and then exhale for 8 seconds. So this breathing pattern aims to reduce anxiety and it helps people to get to sleep. So you can do this even though you're at work, but people say that if you do it when you're trying to go to sleep, so if you're really anxious about a particular case, then you can do it. And it can help people to get to sleep in a minute, they say, right? I haven't tried it to put myself to sleep, but I have tried it just at work when I need a break. So again, it says, touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth, behind the top of your teeth, and then close your mouth and quietly breathe in through your nose to a count of 4. It's like 2, 3, 4. Then count in your head, hold your breath for a count of 7. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But you're holding your breath and then exhale through your mouth. So you want all the air to leave because I know it's really hard to breathe out for a count of 8, but you want all the air to go out and then you can repeat this for 4 cycles. So you don't want to do this too much because it can kind of give you a headache and make you a little dizzy, but you can definitely do it, for up to 4 cycles or in about a minute. What I loved about this video is she talks about having rainbows in your clouds. And that's so important. In the work that we do, we know it's going to be rough. We know it's going to be tough. But if we're able to see the rainbows in our clouds and create that for ourselves, then we are on our way to healing. And we know that that occurs in relationships.
There's an African-American song, right?
All right. So it says, when you can discover compassion for yourself exactly as you are, you can access genuine compassion for your clients exactly as they are. So again, when you are thinking about all the things that you're exposed to, you want to be able to have your own self-compassion and be able to provide self-care and a self-care plan for yourself so that you're able to provide the best care and that you're working from a full cup and not an empty cup. So like I said, I'm going to send over some resources along with this recording. So we have an article called The Pedagogy of Trauma-Informed Lawyering, which has a lot of the information that I went over on these first 2 trainings. And then The Body Keeps Score is a book by Bessel van der Kolk. And it really talks about how trauma lives within the body. So it's really important for us to be able to navigate and to let that trauma out. Because if you don't deal with your stuff will deal with you. And that, is from like the father of psychology and psychiatry, Freud. There's another book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. And what he talks about is ancestral healing and how your ancestors can help to heal you. But all this transgenerational trauma that's living inside your body, we talked about before epigenetics in the other training. But if you're not addressing the trauma that lives within inside of you, then it's going to manifest itself in some of the behaviors we see when we're looking at the behaviors of our trauma survivors. And then again, I'm going to provide you with this American Bar Association Wellbeing Toolkit so that you can look at and start to create your own self-care plan. So again, my name is Dr. Ramona Mershon with Trauma Informed LA. I'm providing my email in case you have any additional questions or need assistance with helping to create your self-care plan. And then here's my phone number in case, again, you need to reach me. This again is links to our social media pages for Trauma Informed LA. I hope you enjoyed this training and we look forward to seeing you again in the next one. Thank you.